Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, I got a fun and exciting video for you guys today because as of about 18 hours ago, ShadPS4, the PlayStation 4 emulator, got an absolutely massive upgrade, bringing it to 0.15.0. Now, I totally understand revision numbers don't really mean much, but it used to be at 0.14, so that is definitely a fundamental upgrade to PlayStation 4 emulation. And interestingly enough, I ran a video on PS4 emulation and the future of emulating games basically a year ago in 2025, so this is kind of a revisit now that it has been updated, because to say that PlayStation 4 emulation in the last 12 months has progressed massively would be an absolute understatement. Last time I took a look at The Last Guardian, it was basically running at 4 frames per second with a ton of graphical glitches. Now, for the most part, it feels like an 80% complete emulation experience. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But ShadPS4 0.15 came out yesterday, maybe like in the early afternoon. And I spent some time testing it last night and doing the voiceover before you watch it today, and I will say it definitely has a lot of improvements around the edges in games that I am familiar with. And if you are curious, I will leave a link to the ShadPS4 YouTube channel down below as well, where they show some of the games that are being tested when you're actually going to see what new versions are going to bring. Now, I don't want you to leave this video and think to yourself, you're going to sit down and play PlayStation 4 games from start to finish with no issues whatsoever. There's definitely games out there you can beat, but they are not 100% complete emulation, and honestly, I wouldn't go into any long game thinking that you're going to be able to see the credits scroll. Now, do not think that's a knock against ShadPS4. The developers are absolutely doing an incredible job. This is still so early in its development, and it's not like the PlayStation 4 is some sort of simple system to emulate, and even a PlayStation 3 emulation probably is more difficult on paper with the cell processor having to deal with that. PlayStation 4 is no gimme, so the fact that it even does this is impressive. But going back to The Last Guardian, in this introductory sequence here, I could basically, I believe, run this and just say it's off PlayStation 4 hardware, and I think maybe only 1 out of 100 people would ever actually notice the difference. Now, obviously that's not something to do on the channel. I definitely let you know when I'm using emulation versus real hardware, whatever the platform, but the main takeaway here is, just look how incredibly good this intro sequence looks. All of the illustrations, all of the fade-ins for the text, this honestly seems one-to-one perfect versus what a real PlayStation 4 would do, at least to my memory, because it has been a little bit since I played The Last Guardian. And as a complete separate side note, if you've never played The Last Guardian before, I cannot stress enough just how incredibly good and special a game this is. If you enjoyed Ico, if you enjoyed Shadow of the Colossus, and you somehow didn't play this one, you're 100% missing out on one of the fundamentally best video game experiences in the modern era that I ever had. Now, before we get into the gameplay of The Last Guardian on the most recent version of ShadPS4 emulation, let's take a look at what it looked like basically 12.5 months ago when I ran this Future of Emulation is Coming Soon video. This is what The Last Guardian looked like. Obviously, it has a ton of graphical corruption. It's running about 5.5 to 6.5 frames per second, sometimes getting into the 7s, and this is definitely something that at least you could identify visually as being from The Last Guardian, but you would not think to yourself, this is what the game is supposed to look like. And again, not a knock on the actual status of ShadPS4, because this is over a year old now, but even seeing this running in and of itself really told you that PlayStation 4 emulation was possible, and in a couple years you'd probably be in a situation where it is very buttoned up for at least a handful of games. Now, moving over to ShadPS4 today, this is The Last Guardian running on the most current build, and I will say it feels like maybe 85% visually the same as what you would see on a console. There's definitely a few issues in some of the lighting models, and there's definitely going to be this weird blue bloom on what I think would actually be some spectral highlights or something, but otherwise, as far as the actual performance here is concerned, feels like it's running on a PlayStation 4, which is to say, The Last Guardian never really ran great on real hardware, and it basically feels like it's a little bit laggy here, just like the real retail version. And you will see those blue highlights right there I was talking about just a moment ago. Seems like maybe a shader cache or a call to the modern GPU isn't drawing exactly correctly, but that definitely looks like Trico from The Last Guardian. Obviously that looks like the boy, and this is just so fundamentally improved. A little bit of an actual texture glitch there on his right leg, kind of flashing in and out, but still, you can look at this and you can think to yourself, well, this seems like 90% of the way there, so imagine if I ran this video again in this actual spring of 2027, it might be perfect. But let's do our first soundtrack sample so you can hear what the game sounds like in PlayStation 4 emulation. I'll be right back with a lot more.
などくあだらかた青く
Adamari Jones, Ateites, Otado Numari, Inakuna.
I mean, as far as the sound of the last Guardian, that just seems like it's doing exactly what it needs for me. Now, as far as the updates are going to be concerned, there's going to be different categories, core kind of being that actual emulation of the PlayStation 4 outside of the GPU, and a lot of these things aren't really going to make sense to many people if you read them. It's one of those things you have to do deep dives and everything, but shader recompilation here, you're going to see that that has got some updates, and that will definitely bring improved graphics in, along with a lot of the libraries, because don't forget, at this point in time, these consoles are more like operating systems that have hardware underneath them. We are far removed from the era of actually drawing to the bare metal. And again, this is what The Last Guardian looked like basically 13 or so months ago when I talked about PlayStation 4 emulation in a video. And this is a massive improvement over a year. And if you haven't upgraded ShadPS4 in a while, you definitely want to grab the new version of the game. Because as we jump back into the emulation, if you just took a screenshot here, you can basically pass it off as being in-game PlayStation 4 footage. And that's definitely an exciting future because, again, emulation always has to start somewhere, and if there's going to be a game that runs this well, The Last Guardian definitely is one that I would pick. Although it still has some issues, maybe you haven't noticed it yet, but I will explain it in just a moment as to what's missing from this scene because it definitely tripped me up a little bit. But as we take a look around, you're going to see all of the particle effects are working, the butterflies are flying around. There just seems to be an issue in the lighting model with some of those highlights because if you actually played The Last Guardian, this scene definitely has a lot more shadow and a lot more kind of contrast between the lightest areas and the darkest areas. So it just seems like on some of the recompilation of the shaders, it's just not 100% dialed in yet. But again, there's so many different calls to the hardware that you can use as a developer back in the day when you're making PlayStation 4 games. This really isn't surprising. And that's kind of the same thing we saw with RPCS3 when it initially got its development start. You would have games that would have complete elements missing, visually, audio-wise, or even gameplay. But just like that progressed to the point in time where you can sit down and play entire PlayStation 3 games from start to finish better than an actual console, I think we're going to get there in the future as well. If you haven't noticed yet, the spear from Trico's leg, it is just not there whatsoever. Not sure why it drew in or didn't draw in this instance. Must just be something about that call to the GPU, but that was a weird one. Maybe if I reloaded the game again, it would pop up. So if you have tested this one, leave me a comment down below and tell me if the spear is there for you. And if you have been using PlayStation 4 emulation, tell me what some of your favorite games to emulate are. I went with one I knew just because it's one of my favorite PlayStation 4 games of all time, and I still had the files hanging out on my PC from the last time I tested it. But there's so many incredible games on PlayStation 4, and even though you can pop them into a PlayStation 5 for the most part, emulation is definitely still preservation, and it'll keep these games alive a lot longer than any of the hardware will ever cease to function. Let's do one more soundtrack sample again because the audio in this really is the ultimate winner, and I'll be right back with just a little bit more detail. I mean, why not go from one growling beast to another growling beast? And it really makes me think to myself, would it kill someone to make a 10 out of 10 Godzilla video game once in the history of video games? There's some that are better than others, but there's never been that quote-unquote perfect kaiju Godzilla game. And it's one of those things, completely aside from PlayStation 4 emulation, just something that I've absolutely always wanted and have never have gotten that perfect Godzilla game. But honestly, PlayStation 4 emulation keeps improving, and the ShadPS4 update absolutely is something you should check out. Just remember, PlayStation 4 emulation is still in active development, so it's one of those things. Don't expect perfection and you can't be disappointed. But I am sure, again, if I revisit this in 12 months or so, it'll definitely be a hell of a lot more improved. And if you want more updates and more modern emulators like this, leave me a comment down below and maybe I'll make updates on the new games that are working better every time we get a ShadPS4 update. But short of that, we are done. Definitely going to keep stomping Tokyo here, and I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.